Hi everyone, my name is Bryce Connor, and for the peer topic, I was assigned film. I'm actually quite excited to talk about this, as I studied abroad in Japan mostly due to the influence that Japanese anime and film had over me growing up. But before I delve into Japan's very peculiar situation with film, I want to discuss it on a more worldwide scale. A wonderful NPR radio broadcast from 2001 discusses that we are currently living in the golden age of films. It states that in the past, a German film would be filmed in Germany, using German language, with a German cast, funded by German money. But as the world is globalized, and the cultural borders between nations have become more blurred, this has come to change. The broadcast goes on to list a film that was shot in Canada, but using the Arabic language. Another example would be Mexico's submissions to the Foreign Films Oscars that year, that was about the Chinese underground. Many filmmakers theorize that this is the result of the change in the world. Life as we know it does not occur within a single nation, and film is reflecting that. In regards to the movie In a Better World by Susanna Bier, one quote from the broadcast states, "The whole notion of the film was to have those incredibly different environments and standards of living, and yet show that the human nature is very much the same." But one of the problems with globalization of film is America. Roughly 99% of films shown in American movie theaters are American films, making them one of the largest exclusionist film industries. This rich environment of foreign films are not only in these bigger industry films, but also found in short films. The YouTube channel titled Pocket Films lists many great 10 to 20 minute films. I watched an Indian short film that involved the difficulties with arranged marriages, a French film that was about struggles of Muslims and their identity in a foreign country, an Irish film about dealing with the loss of a child and suicide, an American film about going insane due to a breakup, and an English thriller about a bipolar patient who broke after a breakup. I actually watched the last one quite late into the night and actually gave me a bit of a spook. But these films covered many different topics. Both of the films in English tend to play off the idea of mental illness and relationships. The Irish film seemed to thrive off of sadness and regret. The French film utilized a somewhat reality show like setting to play off cultural concerns. Uh, and although the Indian film did also address relationships as the English films had, it seemed to be more about a cultural statement, much like the French film. Very often, the idea of these short films is to express a point, so it's interesting to see these overlapping and different themes that change depending on where the films come from. Now the time has come. Sorry, everybody, weeb or not, I will be discussing anime for the remainder of this paper. And you can't talk about anime without bringing up the names Osamu Tezuka and Hayao Miyazaki. I'd imagine that if you like anime, you might have heard of at least one of these two names. But if you haven't, here's a little background. I actually learned of Osamu Tezuka when I was self-studying over the summer using the textbook called Tobira. One of the entire chapters of the book was dedicated to describing him and his history. The overarching message of the textbook had regarding him was this: 昔は日本でも漫画は子供のものと思われていたが、手塚はそれを、小説や英語のような物語の表現方法一つとして確立し、大人でも楽しんで読めるものに変えた。Which translates roughly to, in the past, even in Japan, manga was thought of as something for children, but Tezuka established anime as a way of expression similar to novels and movies, and changed it so that even adults can read and enjoy it. Going off that quote, Tezuka is actually a very interesting man. He went on to take in many aspiring manga artists, giving them not only work but also homes. One of his works that got really popular in the West would be Astro Boy. If you have any interest in him, I wholeheartedly recommend looking into him. The world of anime most likely would not be the same without him. Next, we move on to Hayao Miyazaki, who is a more recent director and who has made many incredible films such as Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, My Neighbor Totoro, and Howl's Moving Castle, and many more. If you don't know the name, you may know Studio Ghibli, which Miyazaki co-founded. Miyazaki once famously said, "Anime was a mistake." Obviously, this was taken quite a bit out of context and isn't exactly what he said, but it has become quite a meme in the anime community. What Miyazaki's intention was in saying this was to express his concern for the direction of the industry. What he said, more precisely, is, if you don't spend time watching real people, you can't do this, because you've never seen it. Some people spend their lives interested only in themselves. Almost all Japanese animation is produced with hardly any basis taken from observing real people, you know. It's produced by humans who can't stand looking at other humans. Now, anyone who's kept up with the industry can see where he's coming from. Personally, I believe the amount of isekai animes out there speaks to his point, but I digress. Now, there are many ways to analyze anime, one being visually. Professor Thomas Lamar has a great video where he discusses how anime captivates the audience in a very visual manner. He talks about how Miyazaki sticks primarily to horizontal motion, and when he wants to express beauty and goodness in his art, he uses his left to right method of movement. It can be seen in many different scenes throughout his work. In contrast to this, he uses motion into depth, which is motion that goes into or out of the screen, to depict violence, stress, tension, scenes of action, etc. But other analyses of Miyazaki's work are more spiritual. Going back a bit to when I talked about Miyazaki and he said anime was a mistake, I did go into this a little bit, but I want to go into the bigger picture. Miyazaki belongs to something called animism, which is a combination of Shintoism and Buddhism. Both these religions echo deeply in his work, and Shintoism is the belief that everything has a spirit: fire, water, trees, mountains, etc. So when they are depicted, they should be treated with respect. A thesis written from Miyazaki's films to compare the human and environmental relationships states that Miyazaki rejects the definition of human as separate and distinct from nature and others and draws on notions of human interconnectedness with sentient and non-sentient beings. For him, the destruction of nature and the destruction of the human soul are the same. This mindset can be seen in lots of his work, and his care and attention to these details is one of the reasons that his films and his studio has become so beloved. Straying a bit from Japanese animation, it is also important to see what else has been inspired around the world through this media. Many other Eastern countries have been producing anime, such as China's anime titled King's Avatar, which is about an esports team, and the very new Korean-based anime titled Tower of God, which I just began watching as of yesterday. But one can also see Western films utilizing Eastern traditions, such as shows like Avatar The Last Airbender and Castlevania. Although I love Avatar with a fiery passion and could talk for hours and hours about it, I'll be going more into Castlevania today. If you watch Netflix documentary Enter the Anime, one of the first interviewed directors is actually an American director based in Los Angeles, California named Adi Shankar, who directed Castlevania, which recently released its third season, which has had an even faster and twistier roller coaster than the first two seasons, believe it or not. If you haven't watched Castlevania, I'll just say now that it's incredibly dark with incredibly graphic scenes being depicted. But the point of the documentary isn't not necessarily Castlevania itself, but it asks the question why people draw these disturbing images and how did it come from such a reserved culture. It certainly can be seen in many other anime: Attack on Titan, Akame ga Kill, Another, and many others. Devil May Cry was so visually disturbing that even I couldn't get past the first episode. And on that note, I'd like to turn things into my personal connection. I'm going to try to bring all these things full circle, so bear with me. First, I'd like to introduce one more statement from an article titled The Role of Film in Society, which goes as such. You can sit down on a plane with anybody and want to start a conversation. You start by saying hello and asking what they do. But then, if you really want to continue the conversation, hey, did you see Avatar? It doesn't matter whether you like the movie or not, it starts a conversation. Now, I think this thought process comes up a bit like American privilege, as not everyone from every country will have seen American films. However, I do agree with the sentiment. While I was in Japan, it was incredibly difficult to bridge the social gap between American and Japanese people. This, in combination with my insufficient language skills, sometimes resulted in awkward silence. However, since I have such an extensive history of watching anime, I could often steer the conversation in that direction, and even though it may not have improved my language proficiency, it very often got a response from whoever I was speaking with. These responses had led me to begin reading manga in Japanese for several reasons. The first being that it seemed like good practice, and the second being that it was to my surprise that Japanese people read more manga than they watch anime. In fact, according to Netflix documentary, Japan uses more paper for printing manga than it does producing toilet paper. As Professor Thomas Lamar says, there's a very large difference between television animation and movie animation, examples of which being something like Naruto and Your Name, respectively. Although they use the same medium, they vary greatly in purpose and method of execution. But I think that they compare well to regular films and short films, where regular films equate to anime television and short films relate to animation movies. The former can certainly have an overlying meaning, but they can also be created solely for entertainment. For example, Dragon Ball Z certainly does have values and lessons put into it, but I don't think that's why people watched it, or what moved people when they watched it. On the other hand, the latter, a movie like Your Name, has much less time to display its message and beauty, so the time spent progressing the story is usually in an effort to progress those aspects, much like the short films I watched. Now I'm in a very awkward position because I grew up liking anime television, but not animation movies. Personally, I blame this on Spirited Away because I was incredibly scared of No Face as a kid. This often proved to create a rift between me and other anime lovers. They would always give me kind of a funny look when I told them that I wasn't interested in Miyazaki's films. Now that I've gotten a bit older and I've watched certain anime films, such as Garden of Words, Your Name, Shape of Your Voice, and several others, I still tend to avoid Miyazaki's films for some reason. It puts me in a very unique position as someone who was exposed to Japanese culture through anime, someone who learned the language through anime, someone who learned how to cook just so they could make food that looked like the drawn dishes in anime, but someone who does not fully appreciate the anime produced by many who would say to be one of the founding fathers of anime. Because of this, I will have to disagree with Miyazaki and say no, anime was not a mistake. Any to me is very different to what anime is to Miyazaki. It doesn't matter which one of us is right or which one of us is wrong. Connecting with people was never my strong suit, and I believe many other people of my age share this sentiment. So more self-focused anime isn't necessarily an invalidation of animism, but more a reflection of cultural differences, not between borders, but between generations. Film is for everyone, regardless of age, gender, nationality, taste. And that's what makes it so beautiful. That marks the end of my connection and the start of my questions. My first question will be in regard to these claims I've just made. Although I say these things, in the end, Miyazaki has created countless anime and is a larger-than-life figure, where I am a 21-year-old sitting in the room with too many water bottles left on my desk. So I will pass the question on to you guys. Do you think anime was a mistake? I know this may not be the highest stake question for most of you, but for at least the people who plan to go to Japan or have already been there, what are your thoughts? My next question is a bit more universal. How has the films from your target language culture helped you learn the language, or lack thereof? I always felt as though I had an unfair advantage with Japanese because of anime. I could literally be passing time eating chips on the couch in my PJs and watching My Hero Academia, and I'd be studying. I always thought a language without such media, or possibly media that I had less of an interest in, would be unfathomably harder to learn. Thoughts? My final question still relates to anime, but I think it can be interpreted from many different artistic outlets. In the Netflix documentary, the question is asked why people draw such dark and horrific images. So I pass this question on to you with a bit of an extension. Why do you think these kind of films get so much attention? If they're so terrifying and gory, why don't we just not watch? Why do you think humans are drawn to this kind of phenomenon? Or do you think this is a fad? Something that's passing? It's a trend that shouldn't be looked too far into. Why or why not? My name's Bryce. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you for having me.